Dana Coverstone is an evangelical pastor in Kentucky. And he started getting dreams only about a couple of months ago. And this dream, it's not his first apocalyptic dream. Apocalyptic dreams have to go by different rules of interpretation than regular prophecy. He's received quite a few regular prophecy, basic warnings, but apocalyptic literature has several interesting rules. For example, you always look at the symbolic interpretation ahead of the literal. And that's true with this dream also. And numerology is very important in apocalyptic literature. And he got this dream, which he called it, as I say, the data dream or data dream, he published it on YouTube about 2 weeks ago. In other words, before the election. So this is a prophecy about the election. And the most interesting part of this dream is he sees the rotunda in Washington, the Capitol, and he sees a casket laid out, and there's a whole bunch of people standing around the casket. And there's a sign on the casket that says, "Inside is the Democrat candidate for president." And that's all it says. And then there is a calendar, December 17th, and that's all it says. So those, I'll give you a little hint. There's no body in the casket. So it's a very interesting dream, but I don't want to get too far ahead of myself on here. So let's go through this verse by verse, and I'll give you my interpretation. And if you have any questions, if you want to disagree with me, let me know. So now he did not break it down into chapters and verses like I did. I did this because I'm used to reading the Bible, which is broken down into chapters and verses, and I think I broke it down fairly accurately as far as helping with the understanding. I saw what looked like an atlas with interstate lines all over the nation, like if you're looking down at an atlas. And you see the interstate lines going all over from state to state. I think the importance of this first verse is he's telling us that this is a prophecy primarily to the United States. Verse number 2. And they were flashing with bits of information going all over. It looked like a data map. It appeared to be like a network of sorts that was obviously overworked. I believe this is the internet, but it could be more than that, and it could be more than just the internet. It could be more lines of communication, but I'm sure the internet is a big part of it. Verse number 3. And some of the data points were not flashing. Some were. The cities, smaller places. You had flashing. You had things that were moving. You had data points that were moving almost like traffic. And I think he is describing what we would call the alternate media. In other words, this is not mainstream media. This is electronic media, in other words. Verse number 4, but I could see there were small workers in white lab coats, and they were trying to work on the areas where the data was not flashing. I saw hammers, I saw guys with laptops, I saw people who were trying to work out the minute details of why this point wasn't flashing or why this point was flashing too hard or too fast. I think what we see here is that the internet is getting out of control with this information, because this is information that big tech does not want to be given to the public. In fact, later on, Dana Coverstone calls this information discovery. And discovery is an interesting word because it's a legal term. It means evidence in legal circles. And I think that what we are getting here is evidence, and you'll see evidence about what in a minute. Verse number 5. And I could see the areas heating up. I heard concerns that the circuits were going to go hot. That's what they said. These circuits are going to hot, and if they go hot, they will fry. And so that was the language I was hearing. And I said they're going to go hot and get fried, and if they could not slow the system down. In other words, if they can't slow down this flow of information, which is what they're trying to do. These lab technicians in white coats and he calls them small. I think that means they're small-minded. They are trying to control this information. They don't want this news to get out, and they're having a hard time of it. And the more this discovery, the more there is of this discovery, the hotter it gets. Okay, now chapter number 2 is where this starts. And this is, remember, the symbolic interpretation takes precedence over the literal. In other words, I don't believe it actually starts in the West, but it symbolically starts a long ways away from Washington. That's where the goal of this information is, as we'll see. The goal is Washington, D.C. So verse number 1 in chapter number 2. And suddenly from the west coast of the Midwest it started. Washington State, by the way, Washington, that word is used 3 times in this prophecy. And that narrows down the application of this vision. It's for the United States, but specifically for Washington, D.C. Washington State, Oregon, California, there were these big flashes. And then I saw smoke from the data points that seemed to represent those bigger cities. And they stopped on the western side of the Mississippi. So I think what's happening is that the stream of information or discovery or news is affecting the big cities the most. Well, the big cities are where Donald Trump is having the most difficulty. Those are the ones that are not giving him, in my opinion, a fair vote count. And I think that's what we are going to discover here. So verse number 2. So it started all the way on the West Coast. Notice that Dana Coverstone says all the way. In other words, the important part of it being on the West Coast is that that is as far away from Washington, D.C. as you can get geographically. Far away, all the way is what he says. It went to the western edge of the Mississippi River. I was not seeing explosions. I was not seeing bombs. I was seeing like systems shutting down because they were so hot. So he is not saying that these are physical bombs. He has to explain that, otherwise you might think they were, because you take the symbolic interpretation first. I think what he is seeing is what we would call truth bombs. Or Sean Hannity, he might say bombshells, as they say in the news reports. So I think that's what we are getting over the internet, and I think this is what we're actually seeing now. We're seeing bombshells coming over the internet, which the mainstream media seems to be trying to hide. So verse number 3 on chapter 2. And as the data points of flashing got closer to the bigger places, the bigger cities, it got faster and faster and faster, and almost in the background in my dream, I could hear honking. And when Dana Coverstone, you can watch, he has this video on YouTube, you can watch it, this entire dream. He actually makes a honking noise, like a warning sign that happens in a laboratory or something like that. So let's go to the next page. And the lab coat guys were working feverishly to fix these things, but they couldn't get the system back online. This, to me, represents big tech censorship. They're trying to censor this news, or discovery, as he calls it later. So instead, they were trying to reroute. I could hear them saying, reroute that system, go around this city. I heard them say, go around Reno, get through Vegas, go here, go there. And they were trying to reroute the system to bring whatever the system was back to life. And I think what this indicates is that the bigger cities are trying to cancel out this information entirely.
Well, not only that, you get your censorship on Facebook now.
Mm-hmm.
Anything you put on Facebook,
Yes.
they'll sit there, come up, and they'll put a thing on there saying fact check, which is part of them.
Yep.
Right? And it's like there was a friend of mine was trying, he lives right up the street, trying to put something on there, they wouldn't let him.
Mm-hmm.
And even though it shows the truth, he tried to do it through Messenger, they blocked him on there too. So he sent it to me in a text, and it shows Hunter Biden doing pedophilia acts and
anything about Hunter Biden, they won't
and,
publish. They won't publish anything about
and you
him.
want to know what the Chinese call them? Kleptocrats.
I don't doubt it, Colin.
That's what they call them.
I think you're right. And well, that is exactly what Dana Coverstone's dream is talking about, this type of censorship, that they are trying to block this information. So, verse number 5. But as they were doing it and rerouting it, the bigger cities were still sending up smoke clouds. I think these smoke clouds would be like disinfo. In other words, smoke screens. It was like you would see in the old Western movies, like a Native American Indian with a blanket or something going over it. It was almost like the data points were sending up information about what had happened there. I did not see Native American Indians. I did not see anything like that, or people doing the smoke. But it looked as if there was something interrupting the smoke as it was coming up, almost like it was sending out a signal of information. So this is kind of interesting. I think what he is saying is that when they block the information, when they censor it, just like Colleen was saying, that itself is a message. It's like the smoke signals from the Indians with the blankets. You remember in the Western movies, you see the smoke going up. It's a kind of, it's blocked. The information is not clear in a smoke signal. I mean, you would have to understand the Morse code, so to speak. And I think that's what the image here is, that the disinformation itself is giving you a lot of information. And verse number 6. And then there was a countdown clock. There was no countdown clock at first, but now on the other side of the Mississippi River, there was a countdown clock. And it started scanning down. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. When it reached 1, the eastern side of the Midwest started having the same flashpoints. And the cities there began to smoke. And the circuits were fried. Now that's interesting about that term, circuit. One of my subscribers says that is a reference to circuit courts. And I think we'll see in a minute, there may be circuit courts involved in this prophecy. So as we see this information or discovery moving from far away from Washington, getting closer and closer and closer to its goal. Its goal is Washington, D.C. And I could hear those guys yelling, the system's going up, it's going up, it's going up, and then they scream, it's going down, it's going down, it's going down. Circuits are going to fry. Again, or did I say, I guess I read that word, circuits. The circuits are going to fry. And that's 3 times the word circuits is used. I think that is significant.
Yeah, 3 is the number of creation.
Pardon me?
3 is the number of creation.
Yes. That anytime anything is repeated 3 times, it gives it a divine significance. The circuits are going to fry, and then there would be these flashpoints, and you would see the smoke. So now this next chapter is extremely interesting, and I think this is what we are up to right now. What we have read so far has already, I believe, occurred, or at least it's occurring right now. But now we're going to get into prophecy that has not yet occurred, in my opinion, and that's why I'm doing this program, is so that we can understand about this Liberty Bell. That's chapter number 3. But when the flashes reached Philadelphia, and this was specifically the city that I saw where all this was happening, Philadelphia. The network line that was red, it looked like a fire hose that was pulsating with like LED lights inside of it. Verse 2, and when it got to Philadelphia, the network line with red flashing went into where the Liberty Bell was sitting. It went underneath the Liberty Bell, and when the pressure began to build up, it was like watching water in a fire hose. It just filled up, and came underneath the Liberty Bell, and when it got underneath the Liberty Bell, it blew it up, and the Liberty Bell went flying straight up into the air and split in half. When I first did a decode of this prophecy, I said that the Liberty Bell here does not represent liberty, it represents cracked liberty or flawed liberty. And I think that's exactly what we're talking about here. And I think it's Philadelphia because that's where we're getting all these controversy about whether the ballots are real or not, the fake ballots. And I think that the cracked Liberty Bell represents the cracked system of counting ballots in Philadelphia. So let's read verse number 3. And the bell split in the middle, it threw the Liberty Bell up into the air, and then the Liberty Bell split in half, and it fell in such a way that the round area landed on the ground. And it was like going back and forth, just wobbling. Back and forth. It didn't land on the flat edge of the bell that had been cracked in half, and the crack was where it had split through the whole thing. So the crack became what split the whole thing in half. So I'm sure all of you have seen pictures of the Liberty Bell with a big crack. So the splitting in half of the Liberty Bell followed that crack and split it in half.
It creates division.
Yes, exactly. So, as I say, I interpreted before that the cracked Liberty Bell represented a false or fake interpretation of liberty, like on the internet where, like YouTube has soft porn, but you can't have freedom of speech, as Colleen was mentioned. Political speech, you can only talk about certain things. You can't talk about, I can't even use his name. If I used his name on here, YouTube would censor it out. And they have, on my videos.
You want to know what I noticed? Like when all this stuff started happening, I used to read some of the Yahoo stuff, and you can used to make your own opinion. You can't do that anymore. They shut it down.
Oh, sure. Right. They did that, right.
So now you don't have a voice on Yahoo.
Right, exactly. And I think that's what this dream is about. The first part, the information is being censored. And we've lived through that. But now, the Liberty Bell is, let me read the last one of this, and then we'll talk about it. Verse 4. It stopped rocking after what seemed like in the dream several minutes of just rocking back and forth. And then the Liberty Bell began to melt. It was almost as if a huge heat source, or from the data point. It comes from the data. Remember, the data kept getting hotter and hotter. The fire hose was so hot that it was melting now. So the Liberty Bell began to melt like heat was being applied. So the heat that's being applied is this discovery, this information. And what I believe Dan Coverstone saw, and I believe this comes from the Holy Spirit. I think this is God telling us about what's going to happen after the election. The Liberty Bell is in Philadelphia. It is thrown up in the air, and it's overturned.
Yeah, because we're going to lose our liberties.
Well, wait a minute, Colleen. What the Liberty Bell represents, I believe, is the fake election, and it's going to be overturned.
That would be awesome.
Yes, that would be awesome. I agree with you, Colleen. I think that is what the Holy Spirit is telling us through Dana Coverstone, that the Philadelphia election results are going to be overturned. That is how I interpret this now. I didn't interpret it that way at first, but I think that is exactly what we're seeing here now. So now what happens next is rather disturbing, so I want to read that. And that's chapter 4. We have time to go through the whole thing, don't we? I think we do.
Yeah.
Okay. Chapter 4, the Washington, D.C. octopus, verse number 1. And then I saw the lines of data were all headed towards Washington, D.C. That's the second time that word Washington is mentioned. From there, in other words, from Philadelphia. It looked like the city had these octopus arms, and they were trying to fight to disconnect the data lines. And what I assumed was they were trying to keep the explosive power of the system shutting down from hitting Washington, D.C. They don't want this information getting out in Washington at all. This information about what they've discovered about the voting in Philadelphia. Verse 2. And so these octopus arms came out, and they were trying to disconnect the systems. But there was one that just kept flashing. It kept building up pulses. It seemed bigger and more extreme, carrying more data, more information than the other lines, which I had seen in the interstate area before. So this, I think I'm not sure who he's talking about. It might be somebody like Alex Jones, or maybe QAnon, someone, or maybe someone we don't know about yet. Or maybe Rudolph Giuliani. Someone is coming up with more information than all of the others, and I think that's who is referred to here. Verse number 3. Though there were people wearing suits and ties, there was business attire. I saw a justice. It was not necessarily a Supreme Court justice. Could this be a circuit court that's going to make a ruling on this? I didn't see faces, but I saw judges. I saw people in suit and tie business attire. professional business, and they were trying to basically pull this line out of Washington, D.C. to keep it from blowing up. They don't want this line of information coming into the deep state at all. They were trying to pull this line away from the city to no avail. In other words, they are not going to stop this information from coming into Washington. Verse number 4. This thing kept going. It finally blew up because all the connections went to the Capitol building. That's exactly where it was going, to the Capitol building. It finally blew up, and the building literally cracked in half. So I've seen the Liberty Bell crack in half, and now I saw the Capitol building crack in half, and it issued a huge smoke cloud. In other words, the Washington, D.C. establishment is going to send up a huge smoke cloud of disinformation. I believe that's what he sees here. As the smoke goes up into the air, it creates a word, and that word was discovery. Okay, so this is a different smoke cloud. I made a mistake there. This is what the smoke, the effect of the smoke on Washington, D.C. Discovery was the word that was then in the air. So you've got the halls of Congress cracked in half, you've got the smoke just building up, and it's spelling this word out in the sky, which is the word discovery. And as I say, this is another word for evidence. In other words, evidence used in a courtroom. Not like the smoke is dissipating. Okay, so this is a little different smoke. He explains that this is not the same. The smoke before was disinformation. This smoke is true information or discovery. It stays there in the sky, and there are people that are running now. And they're not running from the explosion, they're running from the word that they see in the sky, which is discovery. So the swamp is very upset about this discovery. So now we get to the casket, which is really probably the most interesting part of Dana Coverstone's vision. Chapter 5, Casket in the Rotunda. Then the scene changed, and I saw the rotunda of the Capitol, and there was a closed casket in the middle of the rotunda, and the sign on the casket stated that inside was the Democratic candidate for the office of president. And of course, that would be, as we all know, Joe Biden. He was the Democrat candidate for the office of president. And there was a calendar hanging above the casket, and it had the date specifically. One of the first times I've seen an actual date, not on a calendar, but on the paper. It said December 17th. That date was clearly spelled out. And I'm not going to say someone's going to die on the 17th. I don't know what to say about it. I'm just telling you what I saw. That's all I'm doing. But the calendar hanging above the casket, the sign had December the 17th circled. And now, verse number 3 tells us that this is not a real funeral in the sense that you would think about it. Here's what he says. Now, one of the sons of the Democrat presidential candidate was there, but not the other. Well, the son would be Hunter Biden. I think.
Yeah, because the other one died of cancer.
Yeah, Beau Biden. I think you're right. I think he's died.
Yeah, he died of brain cancer.
Oh, okay. And his wife was there. That would be Jill Biden. And she was not looking down at the ground. Nobody was crying. Nobody was crying. Okay, so that's the key. This is not a funeral. This is not someone lying in state. At first you get the idea that Joe Biden has died and that he's in the casket. But that's not what the meaning is. And I interpreted this before, and I think I had the correct interpretation. The casket does not contain Joe Biden. It is Joe Biden. In other words, Joe Biden is full of corruption, just like a casket. It's just like when Jesus spoke to the scribes and Pharisees. Remember, he said that you are like whitened sepulchres, clean and white on the outside, but inside full of dead men's bones. And I think that is because that's why nobody's crying. I mean, certainly his wife would be crying, at least.
Would the 17th of December be that date that they're think all this thing get turned around, maybe?
I think so. The Electoral College, I think, votes this year on the December 15th. But it could be delayed. That's about the time. Remember there was a countdown of 10 days? He went through the countdown 10, 9, 8. That was on one side of the Mississippi. So you can use extrapolation in this case, in which case, if it was 10 days on one side of the Mississippi, it's very likely 10 days on the other side. In other words, you can, in prophecy, you can assume things like that. So I am looking for 20 days before December 17th for this to get really hot. Well, that happens to be Thanksgiving if you look it up on the calendar, 20 days before December 17th. So I think in that time frame between Thanksgiving and December 17th, that's the way I look at it now. Those are the days that we're going to see this really heat up, all this evidence come out. It could be before then. I mean, that's what I'm guessing right now. So verse number 4, and there were also many congressmen and senators from both parties in the room, and they all had their heads down looking at the floor. And they were shaking them violently, just making fists and shaking their heads. They were looking down, not up. Now, if they were looking up, they would be looking up to heaven, but they're looking down. And they sound angry. I think they're angry because the voting in Pennsylvania has been overturned. I think that's what they're angry about. 5, this is interesting too. Also, all their shoes were not on their feet. The shoes were piled up like you walk in the rotunda area. All the shoes were piled there. So all these congressmen, all these senators were basically barefooted. There was a couple of females that had socks or stockings on their feet, like almost like a pantyhose type stocking on their feet. Everybody else was totally barefoot. Now, it took me a while to figure out what this was.
I think they were exposed. That's what that means.
Exposed. Okay, I didn't think about that. Here's what I thought, Colleen. When you go into a mosque, you have to take your shoes off. Are you aware of that? When you go into, in other words, under Sharia law, you must go into a mosque barefoot. I think that's what we see here. In other words, these people are reverencing Joe Biden. This is, in other words, they're like worshiping him. All of Congress, both parties, men and women, Republican and Democrat, they're all worshiping Joe Biden. And even though it's been shown that he is in a casket, even though he's full of corruption, I think that's what this prophecy is showing here.
Yeah, because it keeps their pockets lined with their dollars.
I think you're right. Okay, verse number 6. And then a prominent senator stood up and demanded to see the body. And that's when the sergeant of arms rushed up, with several Marines, by the way, and he said, there will be no viewing of the body today or ever again. There will be no viewing of the body today or ever again. So this is a real turn of events here. The corruption of Joe Biden is not going to be exposed. That's what I think he is saying here, now or ever. So what has happened to prevent Biden from being exposed? Even though we've got all this information, all of this discovery, evidence. So what has happened? So verse number 7. In this part, I'm not really too sure about what has happened, but I'm going to give you my theory. Verse 7. And the senator sat down and collected himself. Then he walked over to that pile of shoes, and he dug through all those shoes until he found his pair. He put them on, and he sat there for a minute, looked around, and you could tell he was getting angry. And he rushed out of the room, and he was running like a sprinter's pace to get out of there. And so now we're coming towards the end of this dream. Smoke was still, now he's outside the building. Smoke was still rising outside. In other words, we're still getting a lot of propaganda about what's going on. And he's running towards the White House with both fists clenched like this. And his mouth is moving, and I did not hear the words, but I could see that he was cursing. Not like swearing or cussing. He was cursing the White House, and he was cursing the leadership. I don't want to put words out there because I did not hear what he was saying, but he was obviously cursing. So he is very mad at the White House, and he mentions leadership. Well, at this time, President Trump is still the president. Has President Trump done something? Because certainly the Sergeant of Arms says will be no viewing of the body. That order had to come from the President Trump. Has President Trump decided not to press charges against Biden, even though all of this information has come out, even though he has probably defeated Biden because of the information coming out of Philadelphia? Or has he decided to pardon Biden because all of this hot news coming over the internet, he's probably done a lot of criminal activity? I am guessing. That's what I interpret this. And verse 10, but nevertheless, I didn't read it all here. Verse number 9, I skipped that. He was upset with something that was going on. I think that's what he is. He's upset that the president is going to overlook Biden's criminality or corruption, whatever you want to say. He was intent on making a change, and he stopped for a moment near the Washington Monument. I think that's the third time the word Washington is repeated, and as Colleen says, that gives it a divine significance. In other words, it's very important. This prophecy is basically for Washington, D.C., in other words, our government. He stopped and looked back, and when you look back, there was 20 to 25 other people who were following him, men and women. So he's got people who support him, who's also angry at President Trump. I can't tell you the parties. I can't tell you who they were. I did not see these faces. The runner, yes, I knew who it was. I'm not going to say. Well, that's kind of interesting, and I don't know if anybody's ever gotten Dana Coverstone to reveal who this person was. But I'm going to guess it might be Giuliani, although he's not a senator. Okay, say verse number 10. But nevertheless, 20 to 25 people. By the way, those numbers are probably significant. Numerology is always important. I'm not sure what it means in this case. 20 to 25 people following after him, but they're holding their shoes in their hands while they walked. They don't know whether to put their shoes on or take them off, in other words, whether to give honor to Biden or not. He told them to hurry, but they just continued their very steady, almost cautious pace to get to him. And then he sneers at them, and he sneers at the White House, and he began sprinting towards the White House as fast as he can. So that's actually the end of what he saw. And the next 3 verses are an interesting commentary. In a lot of his other dreams, there is a figure that shows up and gives a commentary. And that figure, a lot of people have presumed it's the Holy Spirit. As I have been watching his videos lately, I believe it is an angel. But in any way, this person now comments basically on, oh, wait a minute, I'm not quite sure. Let me just, yeah, that's right. This is the person that comes. Verse number 1, chapter 6, verse number 1, which I call Lights Out for America. And at this time, I saw the man I had seen in previous dreams. He was standing in the place where the president gives the State of the Union address. He was standing in the halls of Congress, right there where everybody sees the president give the State of the Union address every single year, and he tapped the microphone. It wasn't a Shure SM58, it was a real thin, very professional microphone that was there. He tapped the microphone 3 times. 1, 2, 3. So what does that mean, Colleen?
Number of creation.
Yeah, again, it's in other words, this is very important what he's going to say. That's what why he taps.
Because if it stopped at 1, that would have been unity. 2 is division. 3 is created.
Oh, really? Okay, I didn't know that. Okay. And then he stated in a very loud voice, "A house divided against itself shall not stand." And he emphasized the word shall. He said it like this: "A house divided against itself shall not stand." And the emphasis was on the word shall. He's commenting here that if Biden is guilty, Donald Trump cannot pardon him in the hope of getting a false sense of unity. Maybe, and you remember, it's in Samuel, 1 Samuel, I think, where the king Saul captured the Amalekites.
Right, and he was supposed to kill everybody and not spare one, but he brought the king.
Yeah, who did
Samuel had a slam.
Very good. And you're jumping ahead, but okay, you're right. Okay, let's look at verse number 3. And then he pushed the microphone down, just like this hand, and pushed the microphone all the way down into the podium. In other words, this is the final word. And he walked to the door at the rear of the room. And on that wall, there was a panel of probably 25 or 30 light switches. Again, that's probably significant. Just your flip switch. And one by one, he flipped them down, one by one, until every light in Congress in that building, in that room, went out. And that was the end of the dream. So as you can see, that dream has caused a whole stir on YouTube and on the internet. And Dana Coverstone has become very famous because of this dream. He's got a YouTube channel now. He's got his own PayPal account, and I'm not sure if he's in Wikipedia yet or not, but he's doing very well. And he has these dreams, or he has been getting these dreams about every 3 or 4 days, but he has not had one lately. And on my next program, I'm going to talk about the next dream that he has after this one, which he calls, I forgot the name of it. Anyway, it's about, well, it's actually what happens after this point here as far as the prophecy goes. So if you want to come next week, we'll talk about that one.